share a theory, if I may. So I fell down a rabbit hole looking at some old interviews of Miss Ghislaine Maxwell, as we know, the former girlfriend and business associate of this guy right here, Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm about to talk about every topic that this app hates me talking about, so just bear with me while I try to censor myself. But looking through those old interviews, it reminded me of a theory that I had quite a while ago, and I really brushed to the side because it sounds very ridiculous. I haven't even talked about it on here. But the more that I'm seeing coming out about Ghislaine Maxwell, and after those audio recordings were leaked from the journalist who was speaking with Jeffrey Epstein,
that was close to straight.
I feel like my theory may perhaps hold a little bit of weight, but again, just a theory, so let's get into it. So the theory that I have is that if Jeffrey Epstein did not take himself out, I believe that Ghislaine Maxwell either knew he was going to be taken out or was one of the people potentially behind it. Hear me out. While there were many people who did not want this man to be alive any longer, we have to remember how much Jeffrey Epstein had on Ghislaine Maxwell. Perhaps she believed if Jeffrey was no longer around, the entire case would fall apart. We remember at the time Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, Ghislaine Maxwell was not taken into custody. Perhaps Ghislaine believed that if Jeffrey was no longer around, that would eliminate the risk of her potentially being implicated in her and Jeffrey Epstein's criminal ring and criminal activity, and potentially eliminate the risk of her having to face time. Obviously, we know that is not what happened, as she is currently serving 20 years in prison. And I know there's a lot of people who believe the exact opposite about Ghislaine Maxwell and believe that she wanted Jeffrey Epstein to take the entire fall for the crimes that she was also involved in. And if Jeffrey Epstein went through the entire judicial process and was brought to justice, there was a chance that Ghislaine Maxwell could either not be implicated at all or face a much lesser sentence. Now, stick with me here. So Ghislaine Maxwell, a lot of people forget, she was arguably one of the most well-connected individuals in Jeffrey's circle. She had international political affiliations. She came from old money, and her father was a high-ranking service member, a socialite, and a sleazy businessman. A very powerful sleazy businessman. Okay, so I need you guys to follow me here and lock in a little bit. This might get a little confusing because now I'm not really talking about theory. I'm just want to give you guys a little bit of factual information about who Ghislaine Maxwell's father was, so then I can go and continue my theory. So Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, there is so much lore, and I'm just going to try to fit this into a nutshell here, but this man owned multiple major publishing companies, the Daily Mirror, New York Daily News, just to name a few. Robert also held ownership within MTV in Europe, and he just had a lot of influence in the media, which was not a good thing. He basically owned the media. The same thing that Jeff Bezos did with the Washington Post. It was kind of the same idea with Robert Maxwell owning so many different publishers. He was able to help control whatever narrative that served his own personal interests in whatever he was involved in, if that makes sense. And Robert Maxwell's ownership of the media was especially dangerous because he had a lot of international government connections. He had connections with the KGB, had connections with the British Secret Service intelligence, and he also had connections to the IDF. In fact, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, was allegedly one of the key figures who helped sell and distribute an allegedly bugged software to the IDF that helped them spy on innocent civilians in Palestine. This software is called Promise. That same bugged software was also allegedly sold to two of the largest nuclear research and nuclear security facilities in the United States. But that's a story for another day. There's so much more to Robert Maxwell in the barbaric things that he was involved in and helped finance, but just from that little snippet of information, hopefully you can understand that not only did Robert Maxwell have massive influence in the media, he also had massive influence in multiple foreign governments. Robert Maxwell passed away in 1991 at the age of 68 due to what was ruled to be a self-inflicted passing after he was found completely nude, fallen overboard of his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, in the Atlantic Ocean. He was gifted a lavish funeral by the Israeli Prime Minister. His funeral was not only attended by the President of Israel at the time, but it was also attended by 6 former heads of Israeli intelligence. Experts quickly ruled out the idea that his passing had anything to do with foul play, but Robert's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, did not believe for a moment that her father took his own life.
What do you feel? What happened to him?
You'll never know, so you'll never be 100%
sure of exactly what took place. The only thing I'm sure of is that he did not commit. The true story, such as it is, will be, people will know more than what they currently do. It'll take time.
Ghislaine Maxwell that we have to remember is this woman had a very different outlook on life than the average person. Despite how normal she may look, like she could blend into a crowd very easily, no shade, this woman grew up with old money. She grew up in luxury. She grew up in a 53-bedroom mansion. She grew up not having to practice the very necessary trait of empathy. She was the known favorite child of her father. She was surrounded by luxury and wealth. Her father named his yacht after her. Back to my point about Ghislaine being easily and arguably one of the most connected individuals within Epstein's circle. So because of her father's massive influence and ownership of the media, Ghislaine's very first job was working for one of her father's publishing companies, furthering the Maxwell family's influence within the media. Realistically, if you believe that the only reason why this case within its entirety has not been properly covered by the media is simply due to American politicians' influence, I encourage you to look a little deeper and remember that corruption comes in all kinds of different forms. I believe after Ghislaine Maxwell's father passed away is when she moved to New York City, and she ultimately lived off a trust fund that her father had set up for her. But she quickly found work in New York City working in real estate, where she began to rub shoulders with A-list celebrities, socialites, and politicians on both sides of the aisle. Here's the part of the story where Jeffrey comes into play, right? So in the late 80s, Robert Maxwell, obviously before he passed away, introduced Ghislaine to Jeffrey Epstein. That is how they met. Not long after this, they began a romantic relationship. It's really not clear the exact timeline of when these two met, to when they started dating, to when their romantic relationship ended, as they were really closely associated from the 80s to 2019 when Jeffrey Epstein passed away. But these two being introduced to one another and forming a romantic relationship led to them forming what they believed to be a business, but was a very sophisticated criminal ring. And it was like this perfect storm because before Jeffrey Epstein had even met Ghislaine Maxwell, he already had very deep ties with a lot of powerful figures in New York City. Well, realistically, throughout the globe, but especially in New York City. Remember, this man was known for more than just the plane and the island. He was a very powerful, well-connected businessman in the city. He owned a massive money management firm and did not tend to work with clients who had a net worth under $1 billion. Some people may know this, some people may not, but Les Wexner, the former CEO of Victoria's Secret, was Jeffrey's #1 client from 1987 to 2007. Jeffrey even operated his money management firm out of a property owned by Les Wexner, and he was Les Wexner's power of attorney for a long period of time as well. And just a side note, not to take you down another rabbit hole, but Les Wexner was very close with Mike Jeffries, former CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, who is currently being charged with crimes very similar in nature to P. Diddy. Anyways, Les Wexner formally cut ties with Jeffrey in 2007 after Jeffrey was arrested and charged with SA of a 14-year-old girl inside of his home and placed on the registry.
The conviction stemmed from several incidents from August of 2004 to October of 2005. The prosecuting attorney would not say how many female victims there are. She would only say there was more than one adult victim and more than one underage victim. After 18 months in the Palm Beach detention facility, Epstein will serve another 12 months house arrest at his Palm Beach home. The 54-year-old will be confined to his home except for work and other activities approved by his probation officer. In addition, Epstein will serve 12 months of community service at his own nonprofit, the Florida Science Foundation. And he has to stay away from minors. The guilty plea and deal end a years-long process that could have sent Epstein to jail for 15 years.
And I don't believe it harmed his personal, high-profile relationships the way it should have. Unlike Les Wexner, Ghislaine Maxwell did not jump ship nor cut ties with Jeffrey after he was charged for this horrific crime and placed on the registry. Parties continued. The traveling to the island continued. It all continued despite the fact that he had literally been caught essaying a 14-year-old child in his home. Incredibly bold and very indicative of compulsive behavior. Now, before we get back on track with this theory that I have, I do need to say that before Jeffrey Epstein owned his private jet that is now owned by the Trump administration, administration. Him and Ghislaine would travel to and from the Virgin Islands in a helicopter that was piloted by Ghislaine as she had her pilot license. Absolutely shocking that she was not offered bail after she was arrested. It's not like she could fly herself out of the United States if she needed to. Ghislaine and Jeffrey did begin to publicly distance themselves from one another around 2015, just a couple years before Jeffrey was arrested, followed by Ghislaine's arrest in 2020. No one really knows why they began to publicly distance themselves, if there was some kind of a falling out, or if they knew an indictment was inevitable. But since then, a lot of information has come out surrounding this case that has been largely suppressed by mainstream media, including the details of how Jeffrey and Ghislaine would bring teen victims not only to Jeffrey's private island, to venues across New York City, New Mexico, Paris, and also Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago, so that those party goers, the guests at whatever event they were holding, could victimize the teens there and use their bodies for their own sick and twisted desires and pleasures. Coming full circle back to my original point of how I was recently watching some interviews of Ghislaine Maxwell, one of those interviews was Ghislaine after she discovered that Jeffrey was found unalive in his jail cell. I'm gonna play that clip for you guys now.
I believe that he was murdered. I was shocked. And I wondered how it had happened. I obviously wish I'd never met him. You know, looking back now.
As you heard, Ghislaine was absolutely positive that Jeffrey did not unalive himself, eerily similar to the interview that she gave directly after her father's passing, where she shared that she did not believe that he unalived himself.
The only thing I'm sure of is that he did not commit suicide.
Now, of course, it could just be a wild coincidence that Ghislaine's father and her boyfriend both passed away from self-inflicted causes. But at the same time, Ghislaine's father, Robert, and Jeffrey, her boyfriend, are not the best people, and they had a lot of enemies, which just further causes the public to speculate. After sitting with all of this information, after watching these old interviews, after pulling out the cork board, I sat with myself and I wondered, who were the two people that arguably had the most to lose if Jeffrey Epstein was to get on stand during his trial and be ordered to tell the truth in court, exposing his accomplices? I believe, in my opinion, at the time that Jeffrey was arrested, the two people who were closely associated to him, who had the most to lose at that given time, were not only Ghislaine Maxwell, but sitting former President Donald Trump. Trump was the sitting president at the time that his buddy, who he used to host massive parties and functions with that were filled with teenage girls in venues including Mar-a-Lago, his home, was arrested. That is not a good look. That is a PR nightmare for a sitting president. But unfortunately, so much information surrounding this case has been skewed and suppressed in order to confuse people of the truth of who, what, when, where, and why. So it has been so difficult for people to get the facts of what has been going on in this case. Not only have we had to contend with media, who is owned by very powerful individuals who may have been associated with Epstein in some sort of form or fashion, but we've also had to contend with the fact that the president at the time, when questioned about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, was dishonest on multiple occasions, further confusing especially the American people, as his cult-like followers believed every word he said, even when there was evidence to prove he was lying. It's literally intentional confusion of the masses so that accountability cannot be placed on one said person. But what really got the hamster wheel in my brain turning was these recently released audio recordings of Jeffrey Epstein speaking with a journalist back in the day. And in these recordings, we hear Jeffrey speaking about his longtime friendship with Donald Trump.
That was close to strength. You probably know he had a scalp reduction. Because he had the same male pattern movement that we all have. He had his scalp moved in system. With respect to real estate deals, he's brilliant. He's a salesman. He knows real estate really well. Anything else but that, he knows nothing. No history, no strategy. He certainly can't read a balance sheet, which is funny. Has no idea. He is charming. He is able to convince people. It's very much like Clinton. Horrible human beings. Nasty things to his best friends' wives. Anyone who first tries to gain your trust and then uses it do bad things.
From those audio files that have been released and listening to Jeffrey speak about Donald Trump, it's very obvious that Jeffrey thought Donald Trump was an idiot. While that opinion doesn't mean a lot coming from Jeffrey, it's very obvious that Jeffrey had no loyalty to this man and was happily laughing behind his best friend of 10 years back. Obviously, we do not definitively know where Jeffrey and Ghislaine's relationship stood at the time that he passed away. We don't know if there was some kind of falling out, but ultimately, I believe that Ghislaine could have seen Jeffrey as a threat to her freedom, and Donald Trump could have seen him as a threat to his image. As we remember, at the time that Jeffrey was arrested, indicted, and passed away, Ghislaine was a free woman. She was not arrested until about 13 months after Jeffrey passed away. Perhaps having Jeffrey out of the equation felt like an easy solution to a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons, but the people who come to the forefront of my mind who had a lot to lose within that time frame were Ghislaine Maxwell and Donald Trump. And I am not by any means sitting here saying definitively, factually, that Donald Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell got together and cooked up this crazy plan to remove someone who they viewed as a liability to them being implicated in his criminal enterprise. I literally think it could have been anyone if Jeffrey did not take his own life. There were a lot of people who did not want this man to speak, not just in the United States. We'll obviously probably never know what actually happened. We can really only speculate. Ghislaine, who is now serving a 20-year sentence in a minimum security prison, has been trying to appeal and overturn her conviction since she's been sentenced, which has not been successful once. But from watching her jail interviews, it is very obvious that this woman is furious.
There's no seasoning allowed. There's no salt or pepper or anything. So it's beyond tasteless. Her stories have changed so many times about what happens, when it happens, how it happens, with different versions. And each time she speaks, there's a different version.
I really believe she never thought she would face any kind of accountability for these crimes. But like I said, if Jeffrey Epstein did not take his own life and he was taken out, it literally could have been anyone. He had so much on so many people, but those are the two figures, Ghislaine Maxwell and Donald Trump, that come to the forefront of my mind of who had the most to lose within Jeffrey Epstein being brought to justice. I think when we have these conversations about Jeffrey and his associates, I think we often underestimate just how powerful, wealthy, connected, and influential that Ghislaine Maxwell was. Ghislaine wasn't just Jeffrey's girlfriend who got caught up in his criminal activity. No, she was a criminal mastermind herself alongside him. If you haven't already, I encourage you to read through some of the civil lawsuits that were filed by the victims of Ghislaine and Jeffrey. You will see that this woman was not some kind of lovesick puppy who would just do whatever her man asked her to and was just gonna stand by her man. No, she was arguably just as ruthless, evil, sick, and powerful as Jeffrey. I literally wouldn't put anything past her. And obviously, it's just a theory that Donald Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell wanted to have Jeffrey Epstein taken out. He had so much blackmail on so many people, a lot of people wanted him gone. Realistically, during that time period, Donald Trump had his image on the line and Ghislaine Maxwell had her freedom on the line. But honestly, we're probably never gonna really know what actually happened or who was involved. I don't know if you've made it this far. That was just my theory. Who knows what actually happened, but just a thought.